Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this edition of the Light the W podcast. It is your favorite Seattle Mariners podcast where we cover all things Mariners baseball. If this is your first time joining us on the show or you're a returner, make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already on YouTube, or you can find us at Light the W, a Seattle Mariners podcast. Or if you want to listen to the audio version, go to Spotify or your preferred podcast platform, where I would love it if you could leave a 5-star review and follow on those platforms. It supports the show and the channel greatly, and it's greatly appreciated. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at LightTheWPod. And finally, without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
The pitch from Acevedo.
Swung on the line, down the left field line for a base hit. Fly ball, gap, right center field. And
Double him up at second.
Luke is going back to the 1-8 track. Get out the right, Brendan Donovan, grandma. It is grand salami time.
Polanco sent it into right, and will send Seattle to the American League Championship Series for the first time in 24 years.
What is up, everybody? Happy New Year. It's 2026. We talked about the year 2025 in our 2025 first annual Light the W podcast awards show last episode. That was episode 107 of the Light the W podcast. So today, episode 108. This will release Tuesday, January 6th. I'm recording this Monday, January 5th, right around midday, just after noon, actually. So this will be out in the morning, but if there's news between now and then, we will obviously hop back on to record. It doesn't seem like there's going to be news. There was hope of Kazuma Okamoto happening over the weekend, but he goes to Toronto. Toronto add to what is actually looks like a decent lineup. I am much lower on Toronto than other people, but that's also from bias of being a Mariners fan and not liking the Toronto Blue Jays. But that's talk for another time. I do think that there will be, I'm 90% sure there'll be an episode where at least I, and probably likely I and Jeff will go over our predictions for the seasons in the year, and that'll include, the Blue Jays, of course, among other teams. But today, back to today, Tuesday, January 6th, when this will release, and we're going to be talking about what happens potentially if the Mariners miss out on the big bats like a Brendan Donovan, specifically in the infield. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at 4 lower tier guys, and I'm going to be comparing them with each other and with 3 guys that the Mariners have signed that are different but similar. 3 infielders that the Mariners signed expecting them to be decent contributors, and then they weren't contributors. One of them was able to stay on the roster throughout the entire season, and that was in the 2022 playoff season. You can probably predict who I'm talking about. But the other 2 guys were both DFA'd before season's end, one of which was last year. So we'll talk about those 3 guys. We'll also talk about the 4 guys that I don't want to use the word target, but they are a lower tier bat that I think would be interesting for sure, should the Mariners not be able to acquire a Brendan Donovan or a higher tier hitter. So I'm just going to name off those 4 guys now. We'll sound the horn and then let's get into it. Okay, so the 4 guys that I'm going to look at are all free agents, and they are all going to be lower tier hitters. Their stats aren't going to jump off the page. Their profiles aren't going to jump off the page. These aren't guys that I'm like, oh, I really want the Mariners to sign this guy. But should the Mariners miss out on those big bats, like I've said, and if Brendan Donovan is even a big bat, these are cheaper, more affordable options that maybe you pair 1, even maybe 2 of them, and then you can also get a more expensive reliever. Like a guy I've looked at a lot is Seranthony Dominguez, who might be an interesting bullpen arm from the right side that the Mariners could acquire via free agency, and he would cost more money. He would be more in the $10 million range. And should the Mariners miss out on a Brendan Donovan bat and they're like, we got to still improve our team, maybe a reliever market is where they opt to go. But that's a conversation for another day. Today we're talking purely about the bats. So the four guys, one of them was a big trade target potential option at the deadline, and that's Willie Castro. You've heard him talked about a lot. This is a guy that's a decent hitter. He can play all around the diamond. Last year he played with the Twins before he was traded to the Cubs, where he struggled down the stretch. Miguel Andujar is the second guy. He's played for Oakland, played for the Reds for part of last year, and he was really good when he played last year. He didn't play a ton of games. He was injured for much of the year, similar to the next guy, Yoan Moncada, who was a big-time prospect coming up with the Red Sox and then was traded to the Chicago White Sox. He was the number one prospect in baseball just about 10 years ago. Hasn't panned out. He's gotten injured quite a bit, including this last year where he had 2 or 3 injuries, if not even, I think it might have been actually 4. And 2 knee injuries in that year. So we'll talk about him. He was with the Angels last year. And then finally, we'll talk about Ramon Urias, who was with, I believe, the Astros last year in Baltimore for possibly part of the year and definitely the year before that as well. Urias, I'm just going to lay this out there, the best defender, at least last year. There are some weird things with his defensive metrics, but as of last year, at least, he was a really good defender, especially at second base. Moncada is probably the most, has the highest ceiling of all these guys, but he also gets injured the most. And Duhar's probably the most balanced. And Willie Castro, just laying this out there now, is probably my favorite, partially because of the way he can move around. And he was a really good hitter, especially in the first half of last year. So we're going to lay out those 4 guys. We're also going to look at 3 former Mariners now. Donovan Solano, Colton Wong, and Adam Frazier. We're going to look at their stats the year before they joined the Mariners and then their season with the Mariners. Each of these guys was only with the Mariners for 1 season. Solano and Wong both got DFA'd. And these 3 guys were more full-time players than any of the other guys I'm talking about. They had a better pass and had better numbers before coming to the Mariners than any of these other 4 guys that I'm talking about as targets, for lack of a better term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out these 4 guys. I'll lay out the stats. I'll lay out the stats of the 3 Mariners guys, and then we'll get into comparing them. So we're going to start with Willie Castro. This last year, he hit 226, 313, 366. That's an OPS below 700 and a below average WRC plus at 92. Only hit 11 home runs, but he was an average walk rate at 8.8% and was slightly below average in strikeout percentage at 24.4%. He was worth half of a win on Fangraphs and was below average as a defender at most positions. He was above average in left field, slightly below in right, -1 DRS, -2 at third base, -2 at shortstop, and -5 at second base, where he was the worst defender of anywhere else. In terms of outs above average, he was -9, which was the 4th percentile, so not a good defender there. That said, he can play second base, right field, left field, third base, center field, shortstop. Is he good at any of them? Not necessarily, but a corner outfield spot seems to be where he has been best at least this last year. In terms of savant percentiles, you're going to hear this throughout this episode, but below average, pretty much everything. Only thing that he's above average in and is red in is launch angle sweet spot. Everything else is gray to blue. He's also above average in sprint speed, 72nd percentile, and he managed to steal 33 stolen bases 2 years ago in 2023. He had 10 in 2025. Looking at his splits is where it gets interesting for him, though. We talked about him being better in the first half. He was a 123 WRC plus in the first half of the season. That's why he was a big name at the deadline near the end of July for the Mariners to potentially go and acquire, because he'd been really good up to that point. With Minnesota, before he was traded, he was a 109 WRC plus overall. When you look at the full season, you want to look at left versus right splits. He was better against lefties, a 109 WRC plus versus an 87 against right-handed pitching. And over the past 2 seasons, before this last year, he was a positive WRC plus in both those years, a 106 in 2024 and a 107 in 2023. Question is, can that play in T-Mobile Park? That said, he's just 28 years old and is a switch hitter with some athleticism and speed and can play all around the diamond. In 2024, he was worth nearly 3 wins, playing 158 games, and played a lot of shortstop that year, even though he was terrible. -9 defensive runs saved that season. The interesting thing about this guy is that while he struggled down the stretch last year, he's still in the prime of his career at 28 years old. He's a switch hitter that was above average against lefties at the very least last year, even struggling down the stretch. And before that, in Minnesota, had been really successful in what is a cold weather environment where they play outdoors for the first few months of the season. He's not a big home run power guy, but still is an interesting prospect. And should the Mariners miss out on a Brendan Donovan, this is the type of guy that could fill that role. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but he's not going to be the most expensive in terms of payroll wise. And he wouldn't really limit you from doing stuff at the deadline to fill those needs. And maybe that would be a Brendan Donovan at the deadline should he not get traded this offseason. All that said, there are flaws with Willie Castro. Number one, he's not that good of a defender. 2024, he was average in terms of range. Outs above average, he had 0 in 2024. But this last year, he plummeted. -9, that's the 4th percentile. He was a -5 DRS player at second base, -2 at third base and shortstop, which I mentioned already. But in the infield, he's not a very good defender at all. That said, you bring him in, you get him working in the spring. Perry Hill has been shown to make infield defenders better, and he's already a decent defender in the outfield. He doesn't hit the ball incredibly hard, doesn't barrel it to the greatest extent, but that's why he's in this cheaper, lesser realm, because there are going to be flaws with each and every one of these players. That said, he seems like he would be the most exciting of all these guys, and likely would still be the most expensive of all these guys. In terms of what he's better at than the rest of them, he's the youngest. He played the most games in 2024 with 158, which means he's the most of a full-time player compared to the rest of these guys. Has the highest sprint speed and plays the most positions, so he's the most versatile. He's also a switch hitter, which only him and Yoan Moncada are switch hitters. The other two guys are going to be right-handed hitters. He's also the only guy below the age of 30. And we've seen that hitters past the age of 30 in T-Mobile Park and on the Mariners have struggled. Talk about Donovan Solano, Colton Wong, Adam Frazier. Solano, 36 in the year before joining the Mariners. Wong, 31. Frazier, 29. All these guys were 30 or older in their seasons with the Mariners. Willie Castro would be just 28 years old in the 2026 season. Moving on to Miguel Andujar, who did not play a ton of games this last year. Just 94 games, partially because he's just a part-time player. But in those 94 games, he was quite good. He hit 318, 352, 470, 822 is that OPS with a 125 WRC plus, hit 10 home runs, and was elite in terms of walk percentage and strikeout percentage, walking 5% of the, or was bad, at walking just 5% of the time. That's the 10th percentile, but was elite at limiting strikeouts, 14.5%, 87th percentile. He was worth over 1 win and managed to play third base, first base, left field, and right field. So he's a corner infielder, corner outfielder. He was above average in right field, average at first base, and below average at both third and left field. Third base is where he's worse, with -6 defensive runs saved there. Similar to Willie Castro, he also doesn't have great range, -7 outs above average. And that comes with less sprint speed as well. What this guy's really good at, though, is limiting strikeouts and limiting whiff. 83rd percentile in whiff percentage, so he's going to put the ball in play, which plays into some of the stuff that I like about Brendan Donovan. He also has a good arm, 94th percentile in arm strength, and has been good for a couple years here. 2023, he only played 30 games, but he's a 105 WRC plus in those games, and was really good down the second half of this last season, a 166 WRC plus in the second half. He was a 171 WRC plus versus lefties and a 108 versus righties. And again, this is a small sample this last year, but you can see with both these last two guys, they are better against lefties, which plays kind of into what Rob Refsnyder's bringing. But the Mariners have a lot of left-handed hitting infielders, namely Colt Emerson, J.P. Crawford, Cole Young, and Josh Naylor. So your starting infield could be entirely left-handed, and getting another guy that is a right-handed hitter and that can hit lefties would be advantageous to this roster, even if it's a guy that can just play in the infield and can maybe just play third. Problem is he has dealt with a few injuries. An oblique injury in 2025 limited him to under 100 games, and he had muscle and knee injuries in 2024, which limited him to less games in those seasons as well. Let me pull up that Fangraphs to see actually how many games he played. Like I said, though, each of these guys has flaws in their profile. And for the most part, it's partially that defensive. They haven't been that good defensively. So looking at games played, this is a role player. He's not played a ton of games, and he's now past the age of 30. 2026 will be his age 31 season. He played 94 games in 2025, played 75 in 2024, and 30 in 2023. He has been over a 100 WRC plus, though, in each of these seasons. And he played in Oakland and Pittsburgh and was above average in both those places, neither of which is the greatest ballpark to hit. And we're talking about the former Oakland Coliseum before they moved to Sacramento this last year. Let's go look at his splits from the past as well. Let's go look at 2024 for him. 2024, similar things where he crushed lefties, and he actually was even better, a 192 against lefties in 2024 and an 82 against righties. If you want to look at what the at-bats look like there, just 56 at-bats against left-handed pitching and 246 against right-handed pitching. Almost as if he was not used properly by Oakland that year. A right-handed hitter facing more right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching is weird, especially when he crushes left-handed pitching the way he has. And if you want to look at his whole career, he's also been better against left-handed pitching, unsurprisingly. A 121 WRC plus against lefties over the course of his career, and a 101 against righties. And if you want to look at purely the at-bats, it's just 491 against lefties and over almost 1,200 against right-handed pitchers. And Duhar is an interesting bat. It's tough to see some of the stuff of, can he play defensively? Can he last a whole season? But maybe the Mariners won't need him to, and maybe all they need is for him to be a role player. Likely would be cheaper than Willie Castro, and as a bat throughout the entire course of the season was actually better than Willie Castro this last year. That said, played a lot less games than Castro did. He's a right-handed hitter, 30 years old already. Like I said, he'll be in his age 31 season, so he's past that mark of where hitters tend to fall off in Seattle. They hit the age of 30, they get past the age of 30, and they start to sort of fall off of a cliff. That said, maybe he can have one more year in him, and the Mariners can get him just to a one-year deal. There's no such thing as a bad one-year deal, and each of these guys would very likely be a one-year deal. Maybe Willie Castro wants a 2-year deal, but after struggling down the stretch, I would expect probably a 1-year deal there as well. Our third guy is Yoan Moncada. This is a guy that was a tantalizing prospect just about 10 years ago. In 2016, he was the #1 prospect in all of baseball, according to Baseball America. That was with the Boston Red Sox. He went to the Chicago White Sox and struggled to stay healthy for the most part. This is a guy that is less versatile than anyone that I've talked about and anyone that I will talk about. This is purely a third baseman, but he is a bad third baseman. And for that reason, he's not all that interesting. And -10 defensive runs saved at third base last year and -13 outs above average is in the first percentile. And that's playing just 84 games because he was injured. A switch hitter that's already 30 years old and was bad against left-handed pitching. He doesn't tend to fit what the Mariners need and isn't really the profile that you would want. That said, we'll talk about him because he is a solid hitter. A 117 WRC plus last year, hit 12 home runs, and was worth more in terms of F-WAR than Willie Castro at 0.7. He was really good against right-handed pitching, a 125 WRC plus, but just a 37 against left-handed pitching. In terms of month-to-month, he was consistent, but he dealt with a lot of injuries. Thumb injury, a hand injury, an ankle injury, and 2 separate knee injuries in 2025 limited him to just 84 games. Last time he played 100-plus games was in 2022, where he was good, a 120 WRC plus, but he's now past the age of 30, where you start to see even potentially more injuries, and he's dealt with a ton of injuries already. I think you can pretty much scratch off Yoan Moncada out of interest for me, at least. The fourth guy is Ramon Urias. He hit 241, 292, 384. It's a 675 OPS, an 87 WRC plus, hit 11 home runs, was worth 1.1 wins, and was a good defender. 7 defensive runs saved at second base, 5 defensive runs saved at third base, and was in the 88th percentile on outs above average with 5. He played third base, second base, and first base. He's purely an infielder. 2024, he was actually a good hitter at 114 WRC plus. With that, though, he was not that good of a defender, especially in outs above average, where he jumped from the 2nd percentile in 2024 to the 88th percentile in 2025. Throughout his career, he's been in the 2nd or 3rd percentile in outs above average in 2021, 2023, and 2024. The only outlier years are 2022 and 2025. It's kind of unknown to me, at least, whether he's a good or a bad defender, because it has gone so differently year to year. He's 31 years old now and saw his bat fall off last year compared to what was decent bat the years prior, a 110 plus WRC plus. Defensive run saved likes him better at second base. And as a right-handed hitter, could potentially pair with a Cole Young there. And could potentially be a backup first baseman. But Rob Refsnyder and Luke Raley both can potentially do that in a pinch as of right now. And at the same time, you look at who else can play first base, and Duhar also can, and I wouldn't be surprised if you could see Willie Castro do it, as he's played shortstop, third base, and second base, as well as all over the diamond. It's a little bit surprising he didn't play first base at times last year. These last 2 guys I have less interest in. But Ramon Urias could be interesting if you believe in that glove translating from 2025 into 2026, because the Mariners do need better defensive players around the diamond, and they need a right-handed hitter potentially in the infield with how left-handed heavy they are. That said, he's not that great of a hitter, as I've mentioned, and is easily the worst hitter out of these 4 guys I've mentioned. And a right-handed hitter, you haven't seen that translate all that well, especially when they're past the age of 30. You compare him to Colton Wong, as we can get into this now. Urias, 31 years old. Colton Wong, 32 with the Mariners. And Colton Wong dropped from a 117 WRC plus to a 37 WRC plus with the Mariners. His glove got slightly better, but wasn't all that good. And this is a guy that splits-wise was just really bad. And he got DFA'd by the Mariners middle of the season after hitting 165, 241, 227. Urias' bat already is closer to those numbers in the age 32 season of Colton Wong than the age 31 season of Colton Wong, where he hit 251, 339, 430, and was worth nearly 2.5 wins. Colton Wong was a full-time player before coming to the Mariners. Ramon Urias, let's be so for real, isn't. He played 112 games this last year and only 100 in 2024. That is more games than Moncada and more than Andujar. At least this last year for Andujar. But he's not as good of a player. And he's probably the worst player on this list, especially if that glove goes back to what the norm has been for the most part of his career. 2025 is more likely to be an outlier than not. Let's look at Donovan Solano. Age 36, before the Mariners, 117 WRC plus, 286, 343, 417, played 96 games. Comes to the Mariners as DFA'd after 37 games played, where he was worth 0 at 4, an 85 WRC plus, hit 252, 295, 344, and was atrocious against left-handed pitching at 28 WRC plus after posting a 134 the year prior. We don't know if he's going to retire, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if he retired. Colton Wong retired after that season with the Mariners at the age of 32, what would have been his age 33 season after that. Adam Frazier is the guy that succeeded the most out of these three players. But Adam Frazier also fell from what he had been. Year before coming to the Mariners, he hit 305, 368, 411. His slugging percentage dropped 100 points. His on-base percentage dropped 67 points, and his average dropped almost 70 points, and dropped below 300 after he'd been a 300 hitter for the better part of his career. Frazier still played 156 games, which was good, and was a solid defender, but he had been an above-average defender, at least at second base, before coming to the Mariners, where he posted a 7 defensive runs saved in 2021 before he came to the Mariners at the age of 29, and had 2 outs above average that year there. His outs above average improved with Seattle, but his DRS fell from 7 to 0. Moncada and Duhar Willie Castro, all below average defenders this last year, and you wonder how that would translate and if it would improve or get worse. The issue with all of these guys is, what can you expect from them? You don't really know. So I think you have to pinpoint things for me that are away from, I think that this guy is going to post a 100 plus WRC plus, and is going to be an above average hitter or an above average glove. And I want to pinpoint traits. I want to pinpoint versatility and a guy that can potentially run and steal bases, or at least has some speed. And to me, Willie Castro is the guy that fits that mold. I also want a guy that can stay healthy and play games, which is why Andujar and Moncada don't interest me quite as much. Both of whom have been better hitters over the course of their career for the most part than Willie Castro. But I like what Willie Castro did in the first half of the season. I like what he did against lefties. And I like that he's a switch hitter that can potentially steal bases and is in the 72nd percentile in sprint speed and is below the age of 30. If I'm going to take a bet on one of these guys potentially being an impactful player, even if it's barely impactful, being a guy that produces positive F4, to me, it's Willie Castro. He can play all over the diamond, even shortstop potentially in a pinch, which is something the Mariners potentially need, although they need it less than they did a year ago. So if I'm looking at a lower tier player, below the likes of a Brendan Donovan, and one that's on the free agent market, Willie Castro is the guy that I'm going to circle as a guy that I think the Mariners should be interested, and that if I had to go get one of these guys instead of another one, he's the guy I would go get. 28 years old, has some speed, and while below average as a defender, is still solid. At least 2 years ago, he was an average defender. With the likes of Perry Hill, I'm willing to think that he will improve even slightly. I like that he walks at an average rate so that on base can't plummet too far, but it wasn't all that great. But I like the traits of Willie Castro. I like the age. I like the versatility. I like that he stays healthy. And I like that he has a solid sprint speed and can run. Let's go look at his Savant page, because I do want to see if he can steal, or if how he looks in terms of base running run value. Let's just give me a second. Castro. So Willie Castro, we're just going to look at the savant page because he is my favorite of these targets, or for lack of a better term. Yeah, 69th percentile in base running run value. He was above average base runner. I like the sprint speed. I like that he can run. Let's go look at his 2024 season. He was even better at launch angle sweet spot. He was a little bit worse as a defender. And I really like that he's below the age of 30. And he was a good defender just, 3 years ago? 2023? 3 seasons ago? Where he's an 81st percentile and outs above average with 3. Let's go look at where he played that season. 2023. He played right field, center field, left field, shortstop, third base, second base, and he was above average and outs above average at shortstop, third base, second base. I like Willie Castro the best, and I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. If anything, I think that's probably a popular opinion. He feels the most likely to succeed with the Mariners out of him and Duhar, Moncada, and Urias. And we've seen how the Mariners have fared with Urias's in the past. We're not even going to mention Luis Urias. I think that's what his name was. Because he sucked. He probably should have been another guy through in here because he's actually similar. Let's actually go look at him. Luis Urias. Let's go look at what he did in the year prior and the year with the Mariners. Luis Urias. Okay. Luis Urias is a free agent currently. Okay, the year before the Mariners, he was an 84 WRC plus. He played 177 games. Was worth 0.0 F4. And go look at defensive stuff. This is advanced fielding. The year before coming to Seattle, played mostly third base with the Mariners. Actually, entirely third base, it looks like. Yeah, entirely third base with the Mariners. He was a 1 DRS and a 2 OAA. With the Mariners, he was 0 DRS and -4 OAA. He's more similar to these guys than anything else. And before that, last year, before coming to Seattle, he was a 110 WRC plus, a 112 WRC plus, and he was just 27 years old in his season with Seattle. Does that scare you? Maybe slightly, but he was an above average hitter actually with Seattle. WRC plus of, I think it was like 103, 104, but basically average. Just going to nail this down one more time before we log off here. Willie Castro, if the Mariners have to go with a lower tier hitter and a guy that potentially is just there until they can have someone, whether it's a prospect or make a trade for someone better. And he's just going to play more than he will down the stretch. Willie Castro is the best fit because of his versatility, because he can run, and because he's just 28 years old and is not on the wrong side of 30 yet. I also think his bat, I believe, can do some stuff. And as a switch hitter, I like him coming to Seattle more than a pure right-handed hitter. And him being better against lefties than righties fits what this Mariners infield needs, and he can play all over the diamond as a sort of utility player, even if he's not that amazing at any one position. So should the Mariners miss out on Brendan Donovan? Should they strike out on Ketel Marte? Or any of those other upper tier players that you are like, this guy can probably be an impactful player for the Seattle Mariners? Willie Castro is the guy to circle, and the guy, for me at least, to watch, because he has the chance to bring at least some sense of impact, even as a lower tier hitter playing in Seattle, where those guys go to kill their careers. That said, if Willie Castro asked for 2-3 years, probably not interested. You probably want a 1-year deal for any one of these guys. Unless you can go 2 and it's a little bit cheaper per year. But no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. And any one of these guys could make sense for the Mariners. Each one has traits that you would like. But Willie Castro has the traits that I think will translate the best to T-Mobile Park and to Seattle out of him and Duhar Moncada and Ramon Urias. That's going to do it for the first episode of 2026 of the Light the W podcast. It was episode 108. Goodness gracious. Pumping out content. Believe I'll be back Thursday with Jeff. Unknown for sure on that. But if not, I'll be back next Tuesday for another episode. That'll be either 109 or 110 of the show. But till then, go Mariners, go M's, and peace.